The presence of Russian warships in Havana, Cuba last week, it's sounding the alarm about a possible escalation of tensions with the United States, stoking fears of a new Cold War. And while some political analysts have downplayed the incident, others have raised concerns about future implications. I want to welcome Florida Senator Rick Scott, who has taken the time to come to our studios here in Hialeah Gardens, AméricaTeVé, to talk about the issues that concerned us. Welcome, Senator, to AméricaTeVé. I'm so happy to have you here.
It's nice to be here, and congratulations on your success.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And also, I want to welcome Marcel Felipe. Marcel Felipe is a well-known and respected lawyer and is the founder of the Inspire America Foundation, an organization dedicated to promoting democracy in Cuba and the Americas. And he's also a chairman of the America Museum of the Cuban Diaspora here in Miami. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's such an important conversation. And Senator, you have said that this situation with the warships is part of Biden's policy of appeasement. Is this a dangerous situation, especially for our national security?
Oh, absolutely. But look, this is only happening because since Biden's been in office, his 3.5 years in office, he's appeased. He's appeased dictators all over the world. So if you look at Cuba as an example, but Maduro and Ortega and Putin and the Ayatollah, we have problems all across the world because of Biden's appeasement. He's not peace through strength. He's peace through weakness. And that's what he's done. And now we have Russian warships here. We have a nuclear submarine here. I served. I was in Guantanamo Bay when I was in the U.S. Navy.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have Russian warships going into Havana then. We didn't have nuclear submarines going into Havana then. So it's all because of Biden.
Mr. Felipe, you have expressed the same concern that we all have about these warships being so close to what we call home, but especially the Cuban community. Because of this concern through Inspire America, I want your opinion I want your analytical reading as part of the Cuban community, because you know very well the Cuban community monster of the military exercises. We have 2 warships and a fast-track nuclear submarine of the Russian fleet. And it is known that Russian government has never attacked directly the United States, but they usually use third countries to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think very few people know the danger in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Capitol. Senator Rick Scott, having been governor of Florida, having been a former naval officer. Look, the Biden administration is ignoring what is geopolitics 101. If you're a superpower, you cannot afford to have anyone in your borders that is an enemy, because whoever is your real enemy, whether it's China or Russia, will use it as a springboard. We've been saying that here in the Cuban community and reminding everyone of the October missile crisis. Former senator that passed away once told our Congressman Lincoln Diaz-Balart, the problem is that most of my colleagues weren't around during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's a real threat. The geography hasn't changed. And unfortunately, other than the first 3 years when Bob Menendez kept that administration in check with regards to Cuba, they're now moving full speed ahead in implementing Obama 2.0 with regards to Cuba. And that leads to situations like this that are not only an issue for us because we care about Cuba's freedom and we don't want Cuba to get the ultimate equalizer, which is a nuclear station in Cuba, but it's a danger to our community here in Florida. It's a real danger. It's why Russia is fighting in Ukraine, why China wants Taiwan, and yet we don't seem to care about our neighborhood. So I'm glad that we have Rick Scott, who understands it very, very well, and is communicating. I mean, this is not a time to be appeasing the Castro regime with easing sanctions like they have recently done. This is a time to call, as Senator Scott has done, for a much tougher position on Cuba.
It's like they literally stopped at our front door and let us know that they can spit in our faces whenever they want, and nothing is going to happen. I mean,
it's
yesterday, Kim Jong-un and Putin are meeting. They met. We have no Donald Trump here to meet with both of them, so now they're meeting and they're together.
Right. Look, everything's gotten bad over the last 3 years, right? When Trump was president, when the border was secure, we didn't have the inflation. But on top of that, Russia didn't invade Ukraine. Hamas didn't invade Israel. Israel didn't send rockets and missiles into Israel, right? And you look at now, we have Russian warships and Russian submarines right here in our backyard. in our backyard. That's the problem with not taking care of your own backyard is its dangers.
One of the things I would add to that is this concept that Cuba is not a threat, which we now know has been implemented in the national security bureaucracy through Cuban spies, right? We had the example of Ambassador Rocha. I wrote an article called the Cuba's Trojan Horses in the American government. And few people understand that outside of Florida, because few people understand that a small impoverished island can dedicate so many resources to trying to penetrate the American national security structure. And one of the examples is now the intelligence community has reported that Cuba is planning to interfere.
We're going to talk about that.
In the elections. And why the elections here in Florida? Because we're the ones that know exactly what they're up to. And I'll finish with this. A former Cuban intelligence chief said, the United States can't compete with Cuba on intelligence matter because they don't have the resources to do so. I said, what do you mean? That's crazy. He said, it's quite simple. It's not how much money you have, it's how much money you dedicate. And when he would leave the UN post as an intelligence officer, they knew there were 2 FBI officers, but they had 20 Cuban agents. They just had to pick who follows the Cuban agents, and then other Cuban agents would go and do the mission. So I think outside of Florida, this is not so well known, as why it's so important to have people who understand this issue.
Senator, some Democrats have questioned if the controversy should force the United States to rethink its relationship with Cuba. Wouldn't this be a disastrous move?
To rethink our relationship with Cuba?
Yeah.
No, we've got, look, one, we need to fight for freedom and democracy. But if we want to take care of our own national security, the Cuban government cannot be strong. They cannot have Russian weapons. They cannot have a stronger military. They can't have a better economy. Because here's the difference. The United States wants to do good. The Cuban regime wants to do bad, right? And let's just look at last October 7th, what happened in Israel, okay? Hamas. Went in, 1,200 people are dead. Could that happen here?
Look what happened in Afghanistan.
Right.
Well, and there's one thing, look, whether you have a hawkish view of foreign policy or whether you have a very nationalist view of foreign policy, what doesn't change in those two worldviews is the need to take care of your borders. When you're thinking about why do we have so much immigration, illegal immigration in the United States, when you think about why are the Russians starting to put bases and the Iranians and the Chinese spy bases in Cuba or the Iranians in Venezuela, it's quite simple because we've abandoned our backyard. And regimes like the Castro regime are taking that role. And they're inviting the Chinese to do so. So I think it's very important for us to take care of that backyard as a matter of foreign policy, regardless of what our worldview is.
Yeah, but this administration is not taking care of anybody's backyard, not even the south border, California, and here, South Florida. The Biden administration has opened our banking system to the so-called MIPYMEs in Cuba. In other words, for money to be sent from Cuba through the U.S. to the rest of the world. How will we know that the Cuban regime will not use them to finance terrorism? How will the Department of State prevent it?
Well, we know they will. We know they're going to. We're not going to prevent them. Look, it's a state sponsor of terrorism, right? They don't cooperate with the United States. The Biden administration said, oh, they were cooperating. Give me a break. I get intelligence briefings. There's no cooperation with Cuba. Exactly. So this is just pure appeasement for whatever reason. I don't get why Biden's doing it. It's making this entire country unsafe, whether it's the open borders, everything he's done. And think about this. We've had thousands of Chinese nationals, military aides that have come across our border. Maduro's, emptied his prisons and sent people here. Everything they're doing is bad for your security.
If anyone knows how communism works, it's our community, our viewers, which are watching right now. And there is a lot of concern after the Biden administration removed Cuba from the list of countries that do not cooperate with the fight against terrorism. What comes next? Will they remove also the Cuba from the terrorism blacklist?
I'm sure they're going to try. I'm sure that's the next step. This is Obama 2.0. This is a pure appeasement. That's exactly what this is. For whatever reason, Biden thinks if you just talk to people, if you talk to the Ayatollah, he was not going to do anything bad. Well, ask Israel if that's true.
Exactly.
Or if you talk to Cuba, they're going to change. They're not going to change. If you talk to Xi in China, he's not changing. These are people that want to demolish our way of life. They want to demolish our way of life. They don't like our way of life.
I think very much as we're seeing with the Israeli-Hamas conflict, the Democratic operatives have identified, as their party has moved further to the left, small constituencies. And I think, one of the leads here was, for a long time, was Joe Garcia, who originally said, the Cuban community is secretly in favor of the Obama policies. Just try them and you'll see. And when that didn't work, now their next talking point is, well, you lost Florida anyways, so we might as well do whatever we want to do and appease the small socialist wing of the party. Senator Menendez kept them at bay for a while. Now they're completely undone. They have declared war on the Cuban community. The Biden administration has declared war on the Cuban community. And this is coming from someone who has always tried to make sure this is a bipartisan issue. We really wanted this to be a bipartisan issue. We benefit when parties compete.
Right?
It should be a bipartisan issue. But they came here a month ago, and the Undersecretary of State, Kurt Campbell, to try to understand the issue. And within days, they made the declaration that in fact they would remove Cuba from the list of countries that did not fully cooperate in a stepping stone to get there. So they've made their bet, and the Cuban community has a clear choice to make.
According to a report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, made public December 2023, which I'm sure you've read, the Cuban regime attempted in 2022 to affect the midterm elections in the state of Florida with operations to denigrate certain candidates. The U.S. intelligence community believes that Cuba's regime will try to influence next November's election, according to these intelligence officials. According to the assessment, towards the general election on November 5th, the Cuban regime will deploy specific campaigns to affect state and local races in Florida. You're in it. You're part of the race. Cuba's efforts are a cause for concern, as are attempted influence campaigns by Washington's main adversaries like Russia, China, and Iran?
Absolutely. I mean, the nice thing is we have the First Amendment, we have freedom. So, but what's happened is there's a lot of bad actors that are out there. They're going to try to lie, cheat, and steal to win an election. And they're going to lie. They're going to try to trash candidates. They're going to do everything they can to find somebody like my opponent that's going to be, that's going to be an appeaser.
I mean, one of the things that's critical in here is, the Democrats are lately talking a lot about democracy. Well, here's a direct threat to our democracy stated by the intelligence services, not stated by the Republican Party, not stated by Republican campaigns. And who are the targets of these campaigns? They're specifically campaigns in Florida. They're not trying to influence a campaign in New Hampshire or California. They're doing it in Florida. And why? Because here is where you have the leaders that represent our community and understand. And in particular, one of the top campaigns that they will be targeting is Senator Rick Scott's campaign, for a very simple reason. No one has had as strong of a voice and as relevant of a voice. And no one, they know, because their Cuban intelligence services are good, and they know that no one is closer to President Trump in our community than Rick Scott. So that makes him very, very dangerous should the president win in November. And then when you couple that with his positions during the July 11th protests. July 11th was, for those that are listening in English and might not know, the largest protests that have been in Cuba since the Castro regime took over. Tens of thousands, likely hundreds of thousands of people protesting over Cuba, put down violently, and with one key ally. The key ally of the Castro regime at that time was the Biden administration, who began saying this was COVID-related until they were forced to admit, because the videos showed people asking for freedom.
After 1,000 people going in jail.
And people asking for freedom. But during that time, when there were some people calling for U.S. action, and some people were a little shy to ask for U.S. action, Senator Scott said, we need to take real action. This is the moment to help the Cuban people with their freedom. We need to mobilize the Navy. A lot of people talk about what has to be done to take the Cuban government. Not lie. You don't need boots on the ground, but just having the U.S. government take a strong position and send a clear signal to the Cuban military. A naval blockade would have done it immediately. And so the Cuban government knows who is willing to take those risks, who is willing to speak with that level of force, and who has the president's ear.
I know we have little time, but I do want to talk about this billboard that we've seen in South Florida, which is people are very upset, and we can understand that. What do you think about what they have done, this pact from Washington?
I don't think they understand the Cuban community. I don't know. This is disgraceful, what they're doing. This is, I mean, to compare a political candidate to Castro it's a disgrace. So if you look at
he has never jailed anybody. He has never closed any media or TV station, even though they were providing fake news.
There's not been firing squads.
He hasn't tortured anyone.
No, I mean, you look at what Castro did. I mean, and your heart goes out to the Cuban. And you just hear the stories of all the things that happened. Trump's never done anything like that. What Trump has fought for is freedom and liberty and opportunity. That's what we want for the Cuban people. We want it for everybody that's here. We want it for everybody in Latin America, and we want it for everybody in Cuba. It's disgraceful.
No, for us that we work in the museum, as we're putting that exhibit together, and we deal with so many political prisoners and victims of the firing squads.
By the way.
When they see this, it's really, really minimizing their experience. So to compare it, and it's painful. But what it shows, I think, is such a disconnect from our community. I think that sign actually does a lot more harm to the Democrats than to the Trump campaign, because if you know this community, you know that they're going to react to that as saying these people don't know, they don't get us. And contrast that to Senator Scott, that before he ever spoke about his Cuba policy, he came to the American Museum of the Cuban Diaspora, asked us, let's meet with all of the leaders, a broad section of the Cuban American leadership, the political prisoners, the families of the victims, and let me hear them. What is their point of view? That makes a difference between a leader and a politician.
And now let's talk about your campaign. And today we have an exclusive, and it's Senator Scott's new ad campaign, which you will see here for the first time in AméricaTeVé. So let's take a look.
Nos encontramos al comienzo del partido. El equipo Libertad, encabezado por el senador Rick Scott, toma el terreno. En posición el equipo contrario, los socialistas. Debbie McCarcel Powell al frente con sus aliados. Debbie se mueve hacia la extrema izquierda. Le pasa la bola a Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. El árbitro le saca la tarjeta roja por matar oportunidades con su agenda izquierdista. Scott avanza por el centro enfocado en proteger nuestros valores y crear mayores oportunidades. Nada lo detiene y Scott anota un gol. Libertad gana.
Soy Rick Scott y apoyo este mensaje.
Well, this will be airing. You will see it everywhere from as of today. We have the exclusive here today. And Senator, how are you fighting the socialist agenda in Washington?
Well, you fight every day for what you're just trying to do is explain what we have to do if we want to have opportunity. Like you had it, we all had it, right? I'm a kid that grew up in public housing, born to a single mom. I had the opportunity of this country. You don't have that in Cuba. So what we've got to do is not have the Cuban policies, not have this big government policies, not have a government dictate everything to us. And so you just got to make sure you elect the right people. My opponent is clearly a socialist, and we just got to make sure those people don't get elected.
Especially in South Florida, right? Let's talk about real quick, because I know we don't have much time, but about the presidential campaign. We saw you a few days ago with Donald Trump. You were right there when he went to Congress for the first time since January 6th, and he met with the GOP. His numbers keep going up, even though with all the legal challenges that he's facing. Do you think that the guilty verdict in New York, 34 charges, it just made it easier for him to become number 47, the next president of the United States?
Absolutely. Everybody knows this is political persecution, especially people in South Florida. They've seen it. They've seen political persecution in Cuba and Nicaragua and Venezuela, places like that. So that's exactly what they see what's happening here. Biden took the number 3 person from the Department of Justice, sent it down to prosecute him in New York. The judge is a Biden donor. His daughter is a Biden fundraiser. So this is just, this is political persecution. It's going to help Trump.
What do you think is going to happen from today to the Republican convention?
Well, he has his, on July 11th is when his sentencing happens. So we'll find out what happens there. I mean, who knows what this judge is going to do. They've done everything they could with gag orders to make sure he can't campaign. So we'll see how much more election interference there is.
I know he's in good spirits, but is our judicial system broken, Senator?
Absolutely. I mean, it's frustrating. I got to appoint 407 judges in Florida when I was governor. And I didn't ask people there what party. I said, are you going to simply enforce the law and not make new law? And there would be no political persecution. Unfortunately, that's not what the Biden administration's theory is. They know that they can't win except through political persecution and lies. And so that's exactly what they're doing. This is the number, our Republican nominee, and it's Biden doing it.
And last but not least, socialism suffocates the human spirit. It kills the freedoms that create opportunities and erases the values that we treasure in this country. Yesterday, I saw 2 FBI agents knock on a nurse's home because she's sounding the alarm on child sex change programs at a Texas hospital. Anyone who opposes to their agenda, doctors, politicians, press, parents, regular citizens are being attacked. That's what we have right now in this administration. How do you preserve freedom in America?
You better go to the polls. You better vote for freedom. If you don't, just think about it. What they've done to Trump, they can do to you. What they're trying to do to this nurse, they can do to you. So if we are not active, in November, go to the polls, get everybody you know to go to the polls, be a poll watcher, make sure you get the vote out, and make sure you know enough about the candidates, and make sure to vote the right way.
Thank you, Mr. Senator, for being here, for coming
nice to be here.
to AméricaTeVé. It's always great to see you. And thank you for always being always with the Hispanic community, always supporting the Hispanic community. Marcel Felipe, thank you so much for being here with us. And thank you, everybody, for watching.